So, Tabitha, why did we decide to do an episode about mudlarking, apart from the fact that there was a very interesting exhibition going on at the Docklands Museum?
Well, I have to admit, this is probably the least literary of our shows, apart from your beautiful novel extract at the end. But I've always been fascinated by mudlarking. I've grown up in East London, quite near the Thames, and I am fascinated by history. And I have a friend who's a mudlarker who coincidentally we ended up interviewing for this show, Tim Miller, and he showed me some of the incredible things he's found in the Thames over the years. And I think it's just part of, I guess for me, it's part of urban folklore, really. Mudlarkers, and before them, the children who used to sort of find things on the beaches back in the Victorian era. It just fascinates me, and for me, it's part of the kind of the lore of London, if you like. So I really wanted to find out more about this exhibition and the people who are mudlarkers.
I think there is a kind of a resonance in the kind of process of uncovering these fragments from the foreshore, which is kind of quite similar to the process of fiction, and also the kind of the tidal nature of the river and the kind of uncovering and re-embedding of objects, and that whole relation of the mix of time again is quite similar to fiction. So I do think there is something there which is kind of very much of interest, and I think there's some the obsessive nature of the pursuit as well is kind of I think it's kind of quite compelling, and I think often with your characters you want people with a compulsion, and mudlarking is a compulsion. I think it is people driven to kind of devote a lot of effort to often kind of quite little reward, and there's just some kind of obsession there about something they might find.
You could compare the mudlarking obsessive to the writer obsessive, desperately sort of, combing through the muck to try and find, a few treasures buried there. It's definitely a kind of it does seem to be a mainly solitary pursuit.
Hmm. I do think going to that exhibition. I mean, I think everyone will get something different from it, but I think a lot of people would find some kind of inspiration, just some little kind of idea. And also, if they could see the Mark Dion piece at the Tate Modern, where he got lots of people to collect objects and he's got them all catalogued in this huge cabinet. I think there as well, it's a similar thing, just kind of seeing those objects just triggers those memories. And yeah, so I do think it's not just indulging your niche interest. I do think it is of a genuine wider interest.
That was the piece you were discussing with Amy Lee Bird, who's also an
Yeah,
artist, wasn't it?
yeah.
She was our first interviewee, and she talked about walking along the rivers, an almost spiritual, meditative experience, and time just slipping away, which I thought was lovely
Hmm.
when she talked about that.
Anyway, time is slipping away. We should probably listen to our piece now. So yeah, but I would encourage everyone to go along to the exhibition. It's at the London Docklands Museum on the Isle of Dogs. Canary Wharf is the closest tube, and yeah, go
For
along. It's great.
writers, obsessives, and dreamers of all kinds, go and have a look. Hello, and welcome to Story Radio, the podcast for readers, writers, and lovers of literature everywhere. Today we're talking to Amy Lee Bird. We're at the exhibition at the London Museum Docklands, Secrets of the Thames. Amy Lee, you're an artist, aren't you?
I am, yeah. Artist, printmaker, picture framer. That's what I do.
And can you tell us a bit about how you're involved with this exhibition and
Yes.
what what it means to you.
Yeah, of course. So I was invited by Tom, the curator of prints of the museum, who had discovered my work online on Instagram years ago actually. I created this piece back in 2019 in lockdown when the world became quiet and there was a different approach to working. I think particularly as mudlarks, they're very outdoor active people. And all of a sudden we couldn't be. So all of the objects that I had collected, I was suddenly sort of stuck with at home. And I mean, I couldn't get into the studio to do printmaking. And so I was looking at these objects and thinking, how can I create with them in a different way? And that's what led to the sculpture. And Tom had been following my work for a while. And I think that piece really struck a chord with him as a mudlark lover and curator.
Could you tell us a little bit about the piece?
Yes, of course, yes. So in general, with my work, I like working with objects that are maybe seen as maybe more mundane or ordinary, a bit more overlooked. I don't really have the eye for coins and garnets and shiny, pretty things. I really do like the kind of the rough and ready. And the foreshore is littered with bones, and I think quite often they're overlooked, but the stories that they can tell are quite poignant.
Can you tell us more about those stories?
Yes, of course. Well, I mean, a lot of the bones that are on the Thames are from abattoir remains, a lot from the meat markets, which would have gone thrown overboard, Tudor banquets, things like that. And these are, bones are what we are made out of. They're what hold us up and keep us straight. And I think there's a real, not only intimacy with that, but also the fact that these are living creatures which would have then served us in terms of working for us, in terms of pulling carts around the streets of London, but also feeding us, which is a vital, as we know, vital source to our survival. And I think there's a real beauty in taking these objects that maybe people don't immediately think of that and giving them a space to be sort of seen and understood better.
Could you describe how they are integrated into your piece?
Yes. So I would go along the foreshore collecting a lot of things that stood out to me, so mostly bones and teeth, clay pipe bowls, oyster shells, which would have fed the poor. Again, it's this link to feeding of the society. And then the sculpture is created by piecing together lots of different bones that I collected into this sort of spherical form. And I quite like that because they're all irregular shapes, and so it took a lot of time to sort of sit and work out what bones worked well against the next one that I'd glued down. There was this sort of, I don't know, I suppose it slowed me down in my practice. I'm naturally quite impatient when it comes to my creativity. I have ideas and I want to execute them immediately, and I think this piece really forced me to sort of sit and observe and to handle the objects as well. I think previously I would sort of pick them up, photograph them and make an etching, and with this it was more of a tactile nature with the object itself, which I really enjoyed.
How much are you kind of imagining the kind of history of the object, or is it just the object as it appears?
It's a bit of both. I mean, I quite enjoy the idea of looking at a certain object and I don't know, guessing where it would have come from, what animal it was from. When you're looking at certain teeth, I know I can look at certain teeth and tell that they're from a pig or from a cow. And I suppose your mind can wander as to where that came from. Did it come from, the meat market at Smithfield's, or did it come, I don't know. Sometimes, I mean, you can find cat jaws down on the foreshore, and then you think, oh God, how did a cat end up here?
There is an area around St Paul's where it's just masses and masses of bones.
Yes,
really
down
amazing.
on Cannon Street. That's actually where I tend to mudlark.
Yeah.
I quite like the intimacy down there because you walk down from from there, and you go down past the pub, down the steps, and then it's a more kind of quiet, secluded area. There also tends to be more bones there. I don't know if that's like a tidal shift. Really, I quite like the objects themselves, looking at the little beauty that they have. Well, actually, the big beauty that they have. Yeah, individual things.
We were talking about Mark Dion's community piece at Tate Modern. Could you talk about how that's...
the dig.
Yeah.
I love that piece. I remember seeing that piece as a kid, as a child, along with Richard Long's exhibition, and I feel like the two go hand in hand quite well because they both work with natural found material. And I think when I was young and I was creative and I probably already knew I wanted to be an artist, I had a very set way of thinking about what it was that I needed to do in order to be an artist. I needed to draw, I needed to paint. And I think when I saw their work, particularly Mark's work, it sort of opened up the possibility of what art could be, and enjoying found material. There's such a joy in finding objects. Like a treasure hunt, and having them all out on display. The sort of the beautiful wooden display cabinet that he has.
Yeah. I imagine he must have kind of really boosted the popularity of mudlarking.
Yeah, I think he did. When did he do that? He did that
It's in 1999, I think, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I remember looking at his work when I was studying, and that's where I really started collecting things from the river. I started doing this in Glasgow way before I started doing it in London. Yeah.
And can you tell us about what's your Instagram handle, and you still on there mainly for your work?
Yeah. I post all of my work on Instagram. A blessing and a curse, I think. My Instagram handle is Emily Bird Artist, and I post videos of when I go mudlarking and beachcombing, and all the sculptures that I make and the prints that I make. Yeah, I post them all there.
I liked Kabir Hussein's embedded philosophy, where he kind of imagines an object in the future which might be. So, if you were going to do something, how would you imagine what we might be finding in 100 years?
In the future, what I really am quite interested in is this whole vaping culture right now. Is we're talking about disposable objects. I've actually got some prints in the shop out of clay pipes, and if you think about it, it's the same principle.
It's the same thing, isn't it? Really,
this sort of like people, gentlemen mostly, I'm guessing, not women so much, but would have walked down the Thames with a clay pipe, pre-packed with tobacco, smoked it, looking at the river, and then discarded it in the water. And I think now when you go mudlarking, you find these
masses
little,
of them, aren't there?
Vapes and also those NOS canister cans. They look like little.
There's a lot of things called whippets that people inhale. Yes, they're called whippets apparently.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah, but they're really interesting objects.
A lot of them in East London.
Yeah, I bet. I'm in East London too. So I suppose I would do something with that if I was to take a kind of a futuristic take on my work. They would be the objects that I would go to.
Do you imagine an archaeologist of the future saying these may be ritual objects, or perhaps? It's interesting to speculate, isn't it? I suppose they would probably know that it was related to some kind of smoking activity.
I don't know. I quite like that they rust. They get quite rusty down on the Thames, and so it completely shifts the object itself as well in the way it's perceived. Yeah. A bit like Kabir's work, the way he's got it, encrusted in this sort of almost chalk-like structure. A bit like if you were to go down to Lyme Regis and go fossil hunting, which I certainly have done and enjoyed. Yeah, I mean, I love mudlarking because it's an escapism. I think there are people that really thrive living in the city from. I think it's a bit of an assault on the senses, at times, and there are people that really thrive from that, and there are people that struggle, and I think I'm probably one of the people that struggle more with this sort of the relentless nature of what London is, and I think when you go mudlarking, you kind of go through this transition, which is actually replicated right here in the opening of the exhibition here, is that you hear the kind of hustle and bustle of the city, and then it kind of quiets and calms, and then you can hear the sound of the water and the waves, and it really transports you to a different place. And I think when I'm mudlarking anyway, I mean, I can mudlark for hours and time just goes. You know, you don't know that you've been there for 2-3 hours. It's relaxing.
Almost meditative.
Meditative.
Yeah,
it's
sometimes
meditative.
it's just the tide that kind of city makes you think, whoa, well,
Yeah.
get moving.
Well, you kind of zone out all of your daily stresses for a short period of time. You know, some people exercise, some people go to, I don't know, yoga. I go mudlarking. That's what I do.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Oh, thank you so much, Amy. It's been
Yeah,
brilliant talking to you. And I hope all our listeners will visit this exhibition. There's some fantastic artworks and finds and all kinds of beautiful things that people have uncovered from the river. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Lovely
thank
to
you.
talk to
Thank you so much.
We're at the Docklands Museum at their new exhibition, Secrets of the Thames, Mudlarking London's Lost Treasures. Can you introduce yourself to our listeners?
I'm Tom Ardill. I'm a curator of paintings, prints and drawings, and I'm one of the curators who worked on the exhibition.
Could you tell us a little bit more about the history of mudlarking and how the exhibition came about?
Yeah, so mudlarking is something that has been known in London since the 18th century, but it probably happened a lot earlier. The term sort of came about in the early 19th century, and at the time it was really one of those kind of unofficial trades that like the poorest Londoners would engage in. So it's scavenging really, and people would be scavenging the streets or scavenging on the foreshore. They were mainly looking for things like coal. There were lots of coal barges that came into the Thames. People, bits would get dropped over, and people would go and pick them up, or bits from ships, ropes, and things like that. But today, a mudlark is really an amateur archaeologist, and actually they're bringing this kind of incredible new knowledge to light, and working very closely with us in the museum, with the Portable Antiquities Scheme, and with each other to sort of share their finds and bring this information together. So it's a term we still apply for kind of amateur archaeologists, but essentially it's kind of these are some of the most knowledgeable people really about archaeology in London today.
Can you tell us a bit more? I was particularly drawn to the amazing Viking objects, Thor's hammer and is it Iamwulf's knife?
Yes, I'm not quite sure how to say the name. Yeah, I think that we're not quite sure how to say the name. But yeah, it's an amazing knife with the name, probably the owner or the maker or something on the knife. Yeah. I probably can't tell you that much about it, I'm afraid. Not being a Viking expert myself. But, no, I might leave you. Through my colleague Kate can tell you a bit more.
Okay, fantastic. We'll ask Kate more about that.
The tidal nature of the Thames, I think, is important in the appearance of objects on the foreshore, and maybe the underground rivers as well. Could you talk a bit about the process, whereby the objects appear in the foreshore for mudlarkers to find?
Yeah, well, I mean, London has, is known for mudlarking because it has this kind of quite unique geological kind of condition with its river, which is that it's not only tidal, there's a very big tidal drop. So at low tides, a lot of the foreshore is exposed, but there's a lot of sort of change every day. So the tide comes in, it washes away sort of the top layer of mud, it churns up the mud, and so the great thing about mudlarking is every day you might find something new that's never been exposed before. It's been under the mud for hundreds of years. And the Thames mud is also brilliant at preserving objects. It's called anaerobic, so it's low in oxygen, which means that things like leather and bone and organic substances that usually would never be preserved in a river are preserved really well. So it's this kind of incredible site where you not only find like ceramics, which is kind of so common, but leather shoes and we've got this amazing leather book cover from the medieval period and even from the Roman period. So it's kind of there's really nowhere else quite like it in the world that has 2,000 years as a city plus tens of thousands of years as an area of population plus amazing conditions for preserving objects, and this tidal range and the range of people who live here and are so interested in its history. So it's a perfect combination really for this kind of citizen science of archaeology.
Oh, that's interesting, yeah, because I've wondered whether it happened anywhere else. I've never seen it anywhere else, at any other rivers.
I think it happens a little bit, and obviously there's sort of beach combing and things like that, but there's nowhere quite like the Thames, as far as I'm aware, that has that combination of history, tide, and conditions.
I was fascinated by some of the religious objects on display. You have knives and axes, I think, from Neolithic times, and Roman artefacts and modern Hindu religious offerings. Can you tell us more about those?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Thames has always been essential to faith, really, in London. From the earliest people who would have lived by the Thames, it was a source of life, and the river was, waterways and rivers always kind of, in a way, kind of like liminal spaces, if you want to use that word, which is a kind of in-between space between this world and another world. They're places where things are hidden and revealed. So they have this real sort of spiritual significance. And a lot of the earliest finds we have are thought to be depositions in the river, so people putting things in the river deliberately. We don't necessarily know why. That might have been to do with making offering to the river, hoping for safe passage or something, or it can be to do with disposing of an important religious object in a kind of respectful way, which is something that still happens today. So some of the more modern religious objects we have are associated with Hinduism, and the river was actually blessed in the 1970s to be used as a sacred river in the same way as the Ganges. So it's every year we get new Hindu objects that are put into the river deliberately. But really, religion is a part of everyday life. We often, I think, forget that, and so any object in a way can have that kind of religious significance, and religion is part of health, it's part of eating and drinking and socialising and politics. So I think it's sort of really important to remember that the Thames is this kind of funny mixture of a dumping ground and a kind of spiritual site.
Could you tell us a little bit more about the faked mudlarking objects created by Billy and Charlie in the 1870s, which caught my eye?
Yeah, these are amazing objects, and actually from my perspective as an art curator, they're a great introduction to this sort of incredible link we found between mudlarking and art, because Billy and Charlie kind of started out as Victorian mudlarks in the way that other mudlarks were. They were looking for things to sell, and they did start to find a few antiquities and find dealers to sell these objects to. And then they realised, well, it takes quite a long time to find a decent object, and you never know what you're going to get. Maybe we could just make some of our own. So they started to create these sort of antiquities that were based on the things they'd found, quite often pilgrim souvenirs, like pilgrim badges, little statuettes. But they got really creative, and they would make all sorts of things. So we've got an amazing kind of king. We've got a medal, which is huge and not much bigger than any medal you'd really find. But they were basing it on illustrations and books and things like that. They were probably illiterate, so the writing is kind of nonsense. But they're incredibly creative, and they were using their skills and their kind of artistry, and in a way that introduces this kind of longer link between what I think of as the art of mudlarking, that there is a kind of expertise and science to it as well, but mudlarks find things because they're creatives and they've got this creative eye, and different mudlarks are drawn to different kinds of objects, and they're very good at finding different kinds of things, and it's often because they have a personal connection to that kind of object. So in some ways I like to think of Billy and Charlie as the first kind of mudlark artists, even though they were forgers. And we still see those connections stay with artists finding things that that they use for inspiration for artworks, or even incorporate into their artworks. So
we just spoke to Amy about that, and she was telling us about how much she's drawn to the really sort of ordinary objects, bones and oyster shells and things like that.
Amy came to see the exhibition a couple of days ago to have a little preview, and it was just so interesting to watch her come into the exhibition and to see what she was drawn to. And straight away she was drawn to the bone items, the flints, the kind of natural items. And it's the same with other mudlarks, that they're drawn to their own particular things. And that's the great thing about this exhibition, is that I think everyone's going to be drawn to a different object, and the stories we can tell with them are so kind of universal, and cross historical periods, and kind of create connections today. And the beauty of mudlarking is finding an object that belonged to someone, or was made by someone and lost by someone. And the mudlark might be the first person to pick that up for 100 years, 1,000 years. And suddenly they've got this instant kind of electric connection across time, as if no time has passed at all.
What insights into the historical regions of London has mudlarking brought to us?
The amazing thing about mudlarking, it kind of tells you about the very local, and then the sort of national, this urban, the national, and the international. So there are parts of the foreshore where you find objects that have been found very close to where they were lost and hardly moved at all. So you can find areas like near where certain potteries were. There are shards particularly associated with that pottery, and different industries have different kind of spots where there's lots of evidence of that. I mean, one of the best places to go is Rotherhithe. And if you just look down on the foreshore from the walkway there, it's just littered with bits of boats. It was used as a breaking yard, so they would break down old ships, and it's just full of rivets, and they've been on the foreshore for 300 or 400 years, exactly where they were left. But you also get that, because London's always been such a global city, you have this incredible movement. So, we were talking about Viking objects earlier. They were bringing objects from right across the world, as were the Romans. We have garnets and jewels and metals that come from right around the world. And that really has continued throughout London's history. So you'll have objects that speak to trade and empire and movement and migration. Because of that kind of pretend is London's connection, with the rest of the globe.
Have you got any thoughts as to what we might be finding in 100 years from kind of that we'll be leaving behind?
This is another place where we worked with an artist to kind of try and come up with an answer to this. So we worked with Kabir Hussain, who's a master bronze caster, and his kind of specialism, or his interest recently, has been to cast kind of very ephemeral throwaway objects in bronze, which is the kind of ultimate long-term kind of permanent art form. So we really wanted to work with him to answer that question, and to think about what we're going to leave behind into the future. And he's very interested in the idea of the Anthropocene, which is the kind of the idea of that we're in a geological age. It's man-made, yeah. So he creates these kind of anthropogenic fossils, so kind of fossils that are made out of the things we leave behind. And he went down to make this object to meet some mudlarks and go on the foreshore and kind of look at what he could see and what they were telling him was found. And he decided to make a work based around a hire bike. It's kind of fairly recent introduction to London, these kind of electric hire bikes. And a lot of them end up in the Thames and in the docks. And actually, we talked to the Canals and River Trust, and they said, have you got any bikes? And they say, yes, we do. We get about 100 of them dumped in the canals a year. So actually, it was great to be able to take one of those out of docks and use to create an artwork. And what I love about the piece is that I think perhaps even unconsciously, Kabir's picked up on this kind of modernist history of sculpting with bikes. So Picasso made a bull from handlebars,
yes, that's right.
and then Marcel Duchamp made his bicycle wheel. And I think Kabir's kind of like in some ways picked up on that tradition and made something new and this kind of future fossil for people to find in the future. So I think as in this era where the Thames is under threat, London's under threat from rising sea levels, erosion, climate change. It's really interesting to think about what we're leaving behind and how people are going to interpret that, because the stories we're telling now from these hundreds of and thousands of year old objects are, there's a lot of speculation in what exactly who owned that object and how it became lost or thrown away. And you wonder what people are going to be saying. Did they throw bikes into the Thames as a ritual offering? Why were they throwing them in there? Or was it, casual thuggery and rubbish?
You're not planning to put any of your pieces in the Thames for people to discover?
No, we haven't done that, but there is a piece associated with an exhibition actually in the Thames now, which is made by Billy Bond, an artist we have in the show. She made a unfired clay head based on one of her sitters that she deposited back onto the foreshore, because it's unfired clay, it'll break down naturally, so it's not litter. But if you get down there quick enough, and if you've got a license,
where is this?
Well, I think that's for Mudlarks to find.
It's a secret.
If you go onto her social media on Instagram, Billy Bond, I think you can see a little bit of the city in the background, and you can work out maybe where she deposited it. But that's for Mudlarks to find.
How
Easter egg for
lovely!
them.
That's such a great concept. Can you talk to us about the restrictions and licence requirements for mudlarking?
Yeah, so today mudlarks are licensed by the Port of London Authority, so they're the kind of public body that look after the foreshore. And this is really just to protect the foreshore and to make sure that they know who's kind of looking there, and that the mudlarks who go down there are following the guidelines, which for their own safety, but also for the kind of preservation of the foreshore. So they generally don't go digging unless they've got special permission, so as not to kind of churn up the mud and disrupt it. But it also ensures that the mudlarks are well connected with the Portable Antiquities Scheme, and that they can report their finds and we can record them all. And some of those end up in the museum as well.
What about if you're not digging, if you just see an object on the foreshore, are you allowed to pick it up and take it? Or
you're not allowed to take it, no. If you find something significant, we would advise you to get in touch with the Finds Liaison Officer or Port of London, and they can come and collect it. But there are areas of the foreshore you can walk on and obviously see what you can see, but please don't pick them up, because they all officially belong to the Port of London.
Like I have to hand my family in for arrest.
Fantastic. Oh, it's so today we're talking to Tim Miller at this wonderful exhibition at the London Museum Docklands. Tim, could you tell us a bit about your relationship with the museum and also about how you got into mudlarking?
Well, it's a very long relationship because it started back in the 70s when I was at primary school. I was doing a school project on Roman London, and I was cycling around town taking photographs of the old Roman wall, and I saw someone on the foreshore down a hole, and so I went down the steps to see what was going on, and he showed me some bottles and coins he'd found, and I thought, oh, how interesting. And when he went, I then sat in his hole where he'd been digging. It wasn't very deep, it's a couple of feet, and I just ran the mud through my fingers, and I found a coin, and I collected coins, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. I don't have to buy coins from the coin market. I can find them myself for free. And so that drew me in. And the coin was actually very interesting. It was a Victorian florin, but which is 2 shillings, and it was just a quarter. And the reason why it was a quarter is that it broken. And the reason why it broken was because it would have been silver, but this one was silver and lead. And it was in fact a forgery, a contemporary forgery from the Victorian period. So this very first find had a story behind it about Victorian criminality. It wasn't just a mass-produced item, minted by the state. It was actually something which had been produced by a criminal in Victorian times, and that little backstory made me even more interested in what I might find.
And what's your role here?
I'm the chair of the Society of Thames Mudlarks, and we're a kind of what I'd call an elite Praetorian Guard of mudlarks. There's only 50 of us,
right.
And we granted special privileges to actually dig down into the foreshore. The society was founded back in 1980 when mudlarking or digging at least, was banned because too many people were leaving holes and not filling them in, and it was deemed to be dangerous. So the way the authorities dealt with it was ban it. But the mudlarks thought that they would kind of fight this, and they set up a society and lobbied the Port of London to say, hang on a minute, we're responsible. Why don't we come to some arrangement where there's just a small group of us, we all know each other, it's self-policing, we all fill in our holes, we all give our stuff to the museum. And that arrangement was accepted. And since then, we as a society have had additional digging rights over your average mudlark.
Like Lara Maitland implies you're a secret society. It's one in, one out, and you hide in pubs.
How long have we got? Because there's quite a lot that Lara Maitland says in her book, which, it's kind of just not true. We're not a secret society. We've never been a secret society. We are a society that had secrets in that we didn't publicise or talk about what we found back in the 70s, 80s and 90s. But the reason for that wasn't because we were secretive, it was because that was the rule set down by the Museum of London and the Port of London Authority. Because the reason society was set up was to deal with the kind of anarchy on the river. So they didn't particularly want to encourage lots of people to go down to the river. That was the whole point of limiting the numbers. And the arrangement was, don't go talking about it, because then we will have anarchy again, then we'll have to ban you again. So we're not a secret society, we're a society which had rules set by the authorities that we stuck to.
A discreet society.
A discreet, yes, thank you.
It's a better story anyway, isn't it? Secret society.
I mean, the problem is with that myth is that every single person who wrote about mudlarking from 1980 to the year 2010 kind of checked the back cuttings and came across this thing about it being a secret society. It never has been a secret society, and Lara just fell into the same trap. Badly researched book from my point of view. Interestingly, she wrote a book called Mudlarking, and she didn't even speak to anyone in the Society of Thames Mudlarks. So
she couldn't find you.
She didn't know your names.
Well, she knew my name because I met her regularly on the river, and I enjoyed the book. I thought it was a very good book, actually very well written, and I like her personally. But what she wrote I felt was a mischaracterisation of mudlarks. She also talked about separating us as hunters and gatherers or something like that, and implied we were all after the treasure and all that kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute, I've got a degree in archaeology, and I've been, writing about the history of London since I was at primary school. I thought it's so unfair to just tarnish all society members with the idea that we're all treasure hunters. It's bollocks. And I think if you're writing a best-selling book, you have responsibility to report things accurately, and she failed to do that. Sorry.
Fascinating. No, really, really good. So, I was talking to you a little bit earlier about your find that's in the exhibition. Could you describe it a bit for the podcast listeners? And
yes, I suppose the quick description is just a bit of leather. And when I found it, it was actually a bit of leather rolled up into a ball, so it looked particularly unexciting. But as I unpeeled it, I noticed that it had all these slits all the way across it, as if someone had taken a razor blade to a bit of leather. And in fact, what it was is part of a Tudor jerkin, which would be a little kind of waistcoat jackety thing that went over other clothing. So underneath there would have been something much more flamboyant, a sort of colourful fabric. And the slits were there, so whoever was wearing the jerkin could show off their posh colours underneath. And it was those slits which kind of identify what it is. But also down the left-hand side, you can see little buttonholes, which weren't obvious when I first found it, but the museum pointed it out to me. So you can tell exactly what part of the jerkin it is. It's effectively the buttonholes, and then it's the bit that goes under the arm slightly to round the back. But it's a fragment of a jerkin. It's not the complete jerkin.
And you told me that in order to restore it before you donated it to the museum, you had to pour water on it. Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Did I get that right?
Yes, it wasn't restoration, it was conservation.
Conservation.
So leather, the reason why it survived since, did I say how old it was? It's about 1400 to 1500 sort of.
Amazing.
So very early Tudor. But leather, if it's taken out of wet conditions, dries out and it will then kind of fragment and disintegrate, basically, it'll fall apart. And I was conscious of that because I found other bits of leather in the past, and they do need to be professionally conserved, otherwise they're lost. So I thought, well, I can't get to the museum for a few weeks because I don't have an appointment. So, but I've got to keep it wet. So in fact, I kept it in the garden, and I watered it every day like a house plant. And that did the job, actually. By the time I took it to Kate in the museum, it actually had grass growing out of it, which sounds like a terrible thing, but it's actually what preserved it, and it's actually what has enabled it to be included in the exhibition today. Obviously, the museum then did a proper conservation job on it and secured it.
You found some other amazing pieces, haven't you? I think you told me once about some coins that you found, and what's your most fantastic discovery?
Well, the best single find I ever found was a Roman coin, and it's Emperor Diocletian, but it's gold, but the most shocking thing about it is it's almost in mint condition. And I remember when I found it, I was in a stand. Normally I'm kneeling down with my eyes quite close to the foreshore because I'm looking for tiny little black silver coins go black in the mud. So and they're often very small because it's the very small coins but get lost. But on this occasion I was just walking from one bit of the foreshore to another. So I was standing up and I could see this coin from a standing position because it was just so obvious. I mean, to a mudlark, it was like a saucepan lid, like that. And I looked down at it and I thought that, and I could see the Roman Emperor's head on it from a standing position because it was in such good condition. I thought that can't be real. It just looked like, you know, that sort of chocolate money you get in your Christmas stocking.
Yes.
It looked like that, and then I thought, well, probably not, but maybe it's a replica that you can buy in museum shops. You know, those absolutely pristine, perfect coins, just too good to be true. And so I thought it can't be, and I leant down and I picked it up. And when I lifted it, in that moment, I thought, that is real, because it was so heavy.
Wow.
I'd never actually had a gold coin in my hand, but picking this up, I knew that is a weighty thing. That is real gold, 100%. And then I got very excited.
That's an astonishing discovery, it really is.
Have you noticed a change in the objects that you find? Are they kind of getting depleted with the popularity of
Yes,
mudlarking?
I think I can summarise the change in one word: fewer. I used to find much more, but I've spoken to Stuart at the museum who records all the finds, and he says the number of finds isn't actually going down; they're just spread out among a greater number of people. So in the old days, I used to go down, guaranteed I'll be the only person on the foreshore. So like when I found that Roman coin, there wasn't anyone for a quarter of a mile on the foreshore. Now if you go down to the good spots where I might go, there could be 20 people there. So if you think you've got 1/20th of a chance that you used to have of finding something, so you've got to go down 20 times to get what you used to get in one time, really. And so it's much harder. But one way I've dealt with this is that I've reduced the threshold for what I would describe as a find. So for instance, in the old days, I'd never bother with pottery, didn't bother with clay pipes, and if there was a lead seal, I might even leave it on the foreshore. You know, I just didn't care because I found so many of these things. Now, if I got a lead seal, I found something.
Right.
So you're just, what you aim for shifts. So you've still got a chance.
I suppose from the point of view of the museums and the people cataloguing all these finds, in a way it's good there are more eyes searching, but I can see it's less satisfying if you're a solo mudlarker.
Yeah, of course, for the good of humanity, of course that it's better if the spoils are shared.
Yes.
For the good of Tim Miller,
Yes.
no, fuck off.
But it's also how much actually does get reported as well, isn't it?
I think everything gets reported. I don't really see any advantage in people not reporting things.
Yeah.
Because it would be, if you found something nice and you tried to sell it, I mean, word gets around. And so...
But then, yeah, there's probably a lot of people who are not even aware that they're supposed to have licenses, who are picking up bits of pottery and so on all the time.
I suppose there would be people who've never been down before who wouldn't know who wouldn't know about the licenses. But I think very quickly you find out, because when there's an unknown face on the foreshore, the other mudlarks sort of say, "Oh, I haven't seen you before. You know, have you got a license?" Or they get chatted to them, and they, by the end of the conversation, they're going to know that they need a license.
Right.
And the PLA do periodic kind of checks. But I always, when I go down now, I always see the same old faces, so I know they've got licenses. So obviously, people just go for a walk. Those people who've never been down before, and they're allowed to go for a walk. But if they take up mudlarking properly, then they.
But didn't the rules change over recent years? That you used to be able to just pick up things but not dig, and then that changed?
Yeah, there have been various rules, the details of which I'm not really across, because I was a mudlark. I had the full digging rights to dig holes anywhere, and well, not everywhere. There are some spaces where no one can dig, and so what the rules were around standard permits and that kind of thing, they weren't really any concern of mine. But yes, I think there have been various rule changes. Certainly for all of us, the stipulations have been getting much more. A greater number of restrictions have been imposed on us about where you can dig and about how deep you can dig. So in the 80s, when I was actually digging, i.e. digging down several feet, you could get. There wasn't really any strict restriction. I think nominally it was like 6 feet or something, but people went down further, 7 feet, 8 feet even. I didn't, I wasn't strong enough, but some people did. And clearly, like, health and safety has become a bigger feature of all our lives, and that has been clamped down upon. And I think now we can dig down to 2.3 metres.
Right. Do you still do digging?
2.3 metres or 2.6 feet. I can't remember. I'm not digging, so I'll have to check it. I think it's only 2.6. It's about waist, about midriff height. You can go down.
Still seems like quite hard work to me.
Yeah, it is hard work. And the other thing is, in the old days, you could dig over 7 days. So you would dig your hole. When the tide came in, you'd cover it with a board, put stones on the board. And so the next day you'd go back to your hole, and you're already 3 feet down, and then you would carry on. And you could never get to the depths we used to get in one tide, and these days you have to fill in your hole at the end of every tide. So it's just impossible to dig very deep now.
I have one more question I wasn't able to get an answer to, but it's just it's about the Viking objects with the Thor's hammer and the amazing knife. I think it's belonged to Ian Wolf or someone like that. I was just wondering if you knew anything about those.
Well, funny enough, I do know a bit about them, because I just spoke to Stuart, who's the Finds Liaison Officer at the museum. Because I was very surprised to see anything Viking in the exhibition, because the Vikings, they weren't really in London. They had the date when Alfred handed over the east of England, didn't he? And it was Northumbria and then East Anglia. But kind of London was a bit, came under Wessex eventually, and it was the Saxons that had that. They actually had a different part of London, didn't have the city. I think they set up base in Aldwych, which is a Saxon name. So I asked Stuart about this. How come there's Viking stuff in the river? And it's as I suspected. It's not like London proper. Those artefacts were found, I don't know precisely, but somewhere out west, like Putney or somewhere like that.
Right.
So I mean, it is London today, but it wasn't like London as it was back in those days. Yeah, obviously, very, very Viking stuff is very, very rare in the river, but it was pretty rare in this part of the country, because the Vikings were like, it was called the Danelaw, wasn't it? And it went Northumbria and York and then East Anglia, I think. That's where the Vikings were.
Do you have a favourite object in the exhibition, apart from the jerkin, of course?
God, there's so many. As you know, I liked there was a little pot that had been found. It's on the section on criminality, and it was full of dice. And the dice, it turns out, I think it date to about 1400. Anyway, the dice had been coated in mercury or weighted with mercury, so that when you threw them, it was more like to come up 6 or 1 or 2, whatever it was. So it was a kind of it was people been cheating at games for as long as you can imagine. But I thought that's pretty ingenious. Although I should imagine if they're playing around with mercury, quite dangerous.
Yes, yes. No, there were a lot of games, weren't there? There was some Roman playing games.
Oh
as
yes,
well,
those
that I
Roman
noticed.
counters. I know. There've been quite a few found in the same place at the Roman Hole, and when I go there, I always look out for that. Never been lucky enough to find one. And ditto those Roman intaglios. Yeah, I know where they're found, and I've never found.
They're beautiful, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yes, no, I was very impressed by those little. They were used for sealing documents. Is that right? Or did I misunderstand them?
Yes,
Or
I
rings. I think
think
it said they were
well, they were
rings
in
sometimes.
rings, but then the ring could be used to leave your maker's mark on something
Right.
in some way. I'm not 100% sure, but definitely you find them in rings.
Yes, the Roman hole sounds rather amazing. Have you found anything?
Yes, well, I found my Roman gold.
That's where you
orders.
found your gold.
Yeah,
Oh wow,
yeah.
wow! What a find! That's a lifetime find.
Yeah, yeah, it really was. And it never used to be a Roman hole, it just used to be quite a good place to look. I
Right.
found all sorts of medieval and 17th century stuff there. I found quite a lot of trading tokens there, lovely medieval spoon it's called a maidenhead knot. At the end of the spoon there's a kind of figurine of a woman.
Yeah.
It's like about 14th century, 13th century. It's really, really nice. And it's only fairly recently that it's become Roman,
Right.
because as the foreshore has eroded away, it's revealed the Roman level.
So it goes deeper down now. And
Yeah.
So these treasures are
Yeah,
objects.
I mean, when I found my Roman coin, it was on the surface, away from that area that's
Right.
eroding, and I
Right.
think probably it'd been dug out years ago, and a digging mudlark had missed it,
Right.
and then it had just been on the surface, probably covered a little bit, and then that had eroded, and then suddenly it was flat on the surface, ready for me to take.
Fantastic! What a wonderful story. Brilliant. Oh, well, that's fantastic, Tim. Thank you so much. It's really, really good to hear from somebody who's... I've got one more question.
Yeah, go on.
Quickly, before we let you go. You've got to be quite strong to do this mudlarking thing, don't you think? You've got to have sharp eyes. You've got to be able to stay bending down all the time.
Strong, not necessarily physically strong, but
Right.
kind of resilient, you mean?
It's just that it must take a bit of a toll if you're doing it a lot.
Yeah, because
Or-
if you're digging, that
Yeah.
is unbelievably hard work. Although, particularly if you're going through the barge beds, 18th century, because they filled it with rubble. And I remember when I used to smash down with my fork to kind of smash it open, I used to get a bruised palm, and it used to be very painful. When you get through that, it's lovely, soft medieval silt, and it's easy. But yeah, that digging is really hard work. But you know, when you're going for something, then it's worth it. But the kind of just surface searching, it's not particularly grueling.
You don't get a crick in your neck? Or
No,
sore eyes?
no, it can. If you're not finding stuff, it can get quite boring.
Yes, yes.
But I think if you've got the memories of what could be found, things if you found good stuff in the past, there's always the possibility that might find you again, and that will motivate you through the pain, the boredom, and anything else. Although personally, I don't find it that difficult, just crouching down.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Brilliant. Well, thanks so much, Tim. That's
Pleasure.
really interesting.
That's great, thank you. This is an extract from a work in progress called The Pain Clinic by Martin Nathan. We climb over the riverbank onto the beach, and the mud and shingle are still damp from the falling tide. The sky is the deep blue of early dusk, and the crescent moon hangs large over Blackfriars Bridge. The Sandman adds another ring of shells round the eyes of the giant octopus he's dug. A tourist drops coins into his hat and he grunts his thanks. His straggly hair covers his face, and the grey loops under his eyes suggest he has not slept for a long time. A group of mudlarkers dig their fenced-off square of shingle. Diane draws a fish in the sand with a length of blackened wood. I gather shore debris for Diane, delivering handfuls of weed, dripping rank water onto the sand. Diane adds a girl swimming beside her fish, and she twists the weed into a tangle of hair and uses shells for a swimming costume. We both stand back to admire her creation. "Did you bring my sister here?" Diane asks. "Did Isabel like to dig here?" A shiver runs down my spine when she asks about her dead sister. Anna and I always agreed we would answer every question, however painful. But now I find myself breathless and fighting for words. The water dribbles from the line of outlets on the wall behind me, and it trickles through the shingle towards the river with a smell of pondweed. My shoes are damp, and the chill reaches my toes. "Isabel liked to stay on the riverbank," I say at last in a voice that doesn't belong to me. Diane nods and draws an exaggerated smile onto her swimmer, adding finned feet with her stick. "How old was she?" "She was 5. I stopped myself from giving the exact count in days. 5.5. She counts on her fingers. "It's my half birthday soon. Can we choose my cake tomorrow?" "I think we should wait." "I'll be the same age as her," she says with a note of triumph. She pulls a broken cassette from the mud and unravels the tape to provide a bed for her swimmer. I begin to explain how important those recorded sounds seemed to us at the time, but she rushes over to see what the mudlarkers have found. They show her a filigreed brass book corner. "What books do you think they read all those years ago?" the man says, handing it to her. She hands it back and peers into the hole. "Do things get older the deeper you dig?" she asks. "The deeper we dig, the wetter our feet get," he says. The water drops further, leaving pools reflecting multiple moons. Seagulls pick around the meagre shore offerings with contemptuous haste, and the wind sends rows of wavelets racing across the surface of the river. Diane is still busy uncovering objects from the mud and holds them up for scrutiny. She reminds me of Isabel in the way she gets totally lost in a task. I close my eyes. I must stop bringing her here. The chill of the air is beginning to bite. "Come on, we need to head home," I say. "Wait." Diane has created a pattern from clay pipe stems. "Look, it's a birthday cake with a candle." "What was Isabel's favourite cake?" "Isabel never ate cake." I hold up my hand, but she carries on with her construction. "She never got her shoes muddy, and she did everything I said without question. She argued, but you never listened." The Sandman packs away his tools and counts his coins. Diane adds a stone to create a candle flame on her cake. "What colour hair did Isabel have?" "A kind of mid-brown, but brown is not on the spectrum, not a proper colour." I can't answer her. I start to walk away. "I haven't finished." "It'll get washed away soon," I tell her. And I explain how tides work and draw a diagram in the mud, but the connection with the moon confuses her and soon it confuses me. Ancient civilizations calculated tidal patterns far beyond their own disappearance, but for me it is still a mystery. A shiver runs up my spine. I tell her about rocks that orbit the moon moons, and how they drive the tides for moon inhabitants who watch the rise and the fall of the sea of tranquility, the sea of vapours, the sea of despair, and they too are perplexed. "Stop," she says. covers her ears. Are the moons too? Tides washing everything away. The early moon has passed behind the sea containers building. We've been out too long. I'll tell you about your sister, but not here. Not now. She peers at me and draws her foot across the sand picture, obliterating fish, swimmer, cake, flowers and moons. And we head up to the embankment. Her sister Isabel never accepted my explanation of tides either.